Peace, 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 everybody. Welcome to this evening's Abolitionist Town Hall. We are so excited to be having this conversation this evening with all of you. On behalf of the uh, Black Philly Radical Collective, we're proud and honored to be a part of the ongoing conversation and tradition of abolition and of resistance and of rebellion. Tonight's evening is going to be a conversation that will delve deep into ideas, thoughts, perspective, and action that will hopefully take us beyond tonight and into the future as we all get free, as we all move towards Black liberation. Before we get started, we thought it only appropriate to begin with a libation. And as we know from an African-centered perspective, a libation is the way in which we call upon the ancestors to enter into the space, to allow us to gain strength from their works and to gain strength from their legacies and their spirit. It is with that that we begin today's libation. As we know, it is not denominational. And we close each affirmation with the word ashe, which means in agreement with or let it be so. That word ashe is a uniting term. It unifies all of us as African people. And so what I do want is for all of our folks watching this evening, particularly those who are of African descent, to participate in this libation. And really what it means to call upon our ancestors. We have a plant, and we also will have some water that will pour into the plant, which represents life going towards life. We want to start this libation with this water by acknowledging the one creator, which we know comes by many names, is the beginning and the end of all, that we say Ashe. We want to continue to acknowledge those original ancestors who came from the beginning of the planet Earth and throughout the universe and the cosmos, those ancestors who founded, who created, who developed, and who implemented all life. With that, we say Ashe. We want to acknowledge the four cardinal directions of East, West, North, and South, to acknowledge the four cardinal directions that African people have lived, died, survived, and thrived on the four corners of the planet Earth. With that, I say Ashe. We want to acknowledge those Africans who built civilizations, not only on the continent of Africa, but throughout the entire diaspora. With that, we say Ashe. We want to acknowledge those ancestors who found themselves kidnapped by foreign invaders, found themselves kidnapped by individuals who came to claim their land, individuals who came to take the land, individuals who claim to take their sovereignty and their spirit. With those, we say Ashe. We pour this water to acknowledge those Africans, ancestors who found themselves in the belly of a ship, in the belly of a boat, those who stayed for months during the transatlantic slave trade, those who found themselves on foreign soil, and in fact, those who sought freedom and liberation in the waters below as they jumped ship. With that, we say Ashe. We want to acknowledge those ancestors who found themselves in South America and throughout Latin America and throughout the Caribbean, who formed maroon colonies, who escaped to freedom and wanted to live out the traditions and norms and folkways and traditions and customs in the mountains and in the hills and in the valleys. With that, we say Ashe. We want to acknowledge all those ancestors who were individuals and organizations and collectives who sought resistance those who poisoned food, those who burnt crops, and those who escaped the plantations, seeking freedom, and always forever seeking freedom. With that, we say Ashe. We want to pour this water to acknowledge the unborn yet to come, those children yet to come, those freedom fighters yet to come, our future legacy yet unborn who will take our work to even greater heights. With that, we say Ashe. We want to also acknowledge those who fought through Jim Crow, who fought through the civil rights movement, who fought through the human rights movement, and those who are fighting still today, those who we've lost, including all political prisoners, and including all those who have fought for liberation. With that, we say Ashe. And as we get ready to close out this libation, we want you first to call out from behind your own screens those who are in your personal lineage, those who represent those folks who are in your own family. I'll start by saying my grandma Mary, my Uncle Butch, my Uncle Tommy, my Aunt Janet. You can call out your own names. And we'll send a Ashe to all of those. Asheo, Ashe. And then we're going to call out all the names who are in our collective lineage. Those individuals who were leaders, who were guiders, freedom fighters, and understood what it means to bring us out to a different change for our community. Those who understood Black power in its fullest. I'll start us off by saying Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ella Baker, Harriet Tubman. And we will say Ashe as you call on the names yourselves. From behind your screens, we want you to call out the names as well. We'll say Ashe, Ashe, and Ashe. So once again, we want to thank you, family. We'll close it out by saying 3 times together for the spirits and all the energy to be in space this evening. Before we pass it off, saying 3 times, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Brother Gabe, for introducing us and bringing us into the circle with that libation. So, my name is Ansharay Hines, and I'm going to be going over the agenda today, but I also want to just reiterate the purpose of why we are here today and what we are endeavoring to do. So part of why we decided to convene this abolitionist town hall is because we want to engage in a dialogue and present to our community our desire and our ultimate vision for what liberation is going to look like and how it is going to take place. Brother Gabe laid out and just endeavored to like call out to and bring the energy of our ancestors into this space and recognize all those people whose steps we follow and all those people who did the work of knowing their humanity as a fundamental fact, knowing their right to liberty and freedom, and acting on that belief in ways that help to expand their reality and in ways that help to build community and allow them to bring their fullest selves into their present without the fetters of oppression, without discrimination, without a lot of the things that are now attempting to reclaim space and take that energy back. And we've known for beyond this current moment, but we are here to restate and reemphasize that ultimately the way that Black life is going to be able to enjoy its most fullest and freest reality is through the process of abolition. So, today on our agenda, we're going to be talking very deeply and explaining the different pieces of our platform and our demands that point directly to abolition. We're going to be speaking to those demands in the context of what is happening in our city regarding the recent shootings and murders of Black people who are in our city, as well as the way that people who are engaged in resistance are being criminalized and persecuted even beyond this current moment moments that are dating back to what happened on 52nd Street, what happened in May, the deployment of militaristic tactics in our communities. We're going to be illuminating all those things in order to bring together our vision for what it really means to be free in this moment. So first, we're going to introduce the Black Philly Radical Collective to everyone. We're going to talk about the plans for reform as they stand right now and why reform is not going to be enough in order to truly live in a reality where we do not have to deal with periodically having to endure murders and watching people die on our screens. Abolition is the only true solution in order to make sure that that is never going to happen to us again. We're going to go over in detail the abolitionist demands that speak to what we are trying to achieve. And then we're going to talk through what our action steps are and what we are prepared to push forward in order to bring our vision into reality. And then we're going to share how everybody can engage with us in that process. So I'm going to bring on Crystal Strong. She's going to go over who we are as the Black Philly Radical Collective, talk about some of the actions we've been engaged in, and highlight some of the demands that we're going to be focusing on today.
Good evening, everyone. As Anshere mentioned, my name is Crystal Strong, and I'm a very proud organizer with the Black Philly Radical Collective. You might be wondering who is or who are the people that make up the Black Philly Radical Collective. You might be wondering who are the organizations that make up the Black Philly Radical Collective. And we want to tell you a little bit about our work first and what we have been doing in this moment of Black rebellion, Black uprisings, and why we believe that abolition is the only way. So first and foremost, what is the Black Philly Radical Collective? We are, as the name suggests, a collective of Philadelphia-based Black radical organizations that are abolitionist in orientation and that have actually been working towards abolition for years and in several cases for decades. So what have we been doing in this moment of unprecedented Black rebellion in the United States and around the world? We formed in the context of the uprisings that formed in response to the murder of our brother George Floyd in Minneapolis. On May 30th, we banded together with thousands of Philadelphians who were outraged by the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department. And that was the beginning of our Black uprising here in the city of Philadelphia. And that was the moment in which the Black Philadelphia Radical Collective entered into the public conversation and into the public space. Very shortly after that, in June, mid-June, we held an action called the Protest Against Police Terror at 6221 Osage Avenue, which is where on May 13th, 1985, the city of Philadelphia dropped a bomb on the MOVE organization that killed 11 people and that burned down 2 city blocks, because we wanted to remind our city that this conversation about police terror, it doesn't begin in 2020. It doesn't begin in 1985. It dates back as long as Black people have been kidnapped to this land. Then in the midst of rebellion, we understood that our people, after being tear gassed, after rising up, after being told that we are looting when in fact we are resisting with all of the tools at our disposal, we recognize that we have to continue to use joy as an act of resistance. So I know that some of you watching came out to Juneteenth, which is Philadelphia's newest Juneteenth celebration. And then after that, the Black Philly Radical Collective did a series of campaigns. We also attempted to really share with our local community that we in the Black Philly Radical Collective have demands. We have a vision for abolition, right? When we talk about defunding, it is a part of a trajectory that is actually intending to abolish the police. So at the end of June, we held an official press conference at the Slavery Memorial, which in the midst of the US kind of narrative of Philadelphia as the center of liberty in which our ancestors were simultaneously held captive, we said that we, as the Black Philly Radical Collective, as representatives of all of Black Philadelphia, we want and we demand freedom. And as we were attempting to build public awareness about our 13 demands, which you'll be hearing more about as our conversation goes on, we decided to focus on several of our demands, which were immediately actionable. And one of them was to end the criminalization of Black resistance, which is a demand that we targeted to our supposedly progressive district attorney, Larry Krasner, because in the midst of these uprisings, we saw that Black people, poor people were being criminalized for rising up in resistance. And we fundamentally believe that it is an abolitionist demand to assert that our criminalization or our resistance is righteous and it will not be criminalized. We also held an action in Malcolm X Park at the end of June, uplifting the cause of political prisoners. We say, what's the call? Free them all. And one of our core demands is that we fundamentally assert the belief that our political prisoners must be released immediately and permanently. As many of you know, a wonderful resistance around housing justice formed in the context of this Black rebellion, the encampment that was at the Parkway, also at the site of the Public Housing Authority. And the Black Philly Radical Collective stands in firm support of the encampment's demands and housing justice for all people. Another one of our core demands is the immediate and permanent removal of all symbols of state violence. Some of you saw that in the first days of the rebellion, the Rizzo statue was removed. It shouldn't have been there in the first place. It should have been removed long ago. You also probably saw that the city of Philadelphia responded to our resistance by boarding up the Columbus statue. But we also say that there are other symbols of state violence that must be removed permanently, including the street that has been dedicated to Wilson Goode, the former mayor of the city of Philadelphia, on whose watch the city dropped a bomb at 6221 Osage Avenue. So we say no good way, and we also say no to all symbols of state violence. In October, we continued our actions, we continued our mobilizations by shifting our intentions towards deeper levels of organizing, deeper forms of solidarity with one another. And we held the Fists Up Fight Back action on October 3rd at the steps of the Art Museum. It was a rally, it was a march, it was a teach-in in honor of Breonna Taylor, in solidarity with Louisville, and centering that all power is with the people and that our focus is on the continued mobilization of our communities. And most recently, I'm sure that all of you watching are aware of the brutal murder of our dear community member and brother, Walter Wallace Jr. by the Philadelphia police a little over 2 weeks ago. You noticed that the Philadelphia police, instead of responding to someone who had a disability, someone who was in distress and in need of care, instead of responding with that care, they responded with brutality, they responded with murder. And so we noticed an upsurge, a resurgence of the resistance that has carried us throughout this entire summer. You know, if we can rise up for George Floyd, if we can rise up for Breonna Taylor, of course we are going to rise up for someone like Walter Wallace Jr. And so we have seen our community members take to the streets. We have also seen the brutal police backlash once again for our resistance. We have had several actions over the past 2 weeks. We have also showed up in love and in support of the Wallace family. And so that is a way of communicating to you all that we at the Black Philly Radical Collective, we are not new to this. We are true to this. We are deeply committed to the cause of abolition. And in particular, in our conversation tonight, we are going to focus on a set number of our 13 demands, which we hope you will learn about more after this conversation. But for the purpose of this evening, we are going to focus on the immediate end to the criminalization of Black resistance, which is something that we are seeing once again with the capturing of new political prisoners, the attempted capturing of new political prisoners like community member Ant Smith. We are also going to be focusing on our demand for the swift firing of killer cops, which is especially relevant in this moment now that we know the identities of the two Philadelphia police officers who murdered our brother Walter Wallace Jr. We are also focusing on abolishing the Fraternal Order of the Police and the Police Advisory Committee. We are focusing as well on ending the military occupation of the Black community. We saw this summer the use of tear gas on 52nd Street on a residential, primarily Black community. We also saw the brutal response of the Philadelphia police to our protests in response to their murder of Walter Wallace Jr. And so we want it to be fundamentally clear that our stance is that the end of this occupation of our communities by the police must end. We also are going to focus on protection for Black Philadelphia. Our communities deserve protection. They deserve to feel safe. And finally, we are going to focus this evening on ending all carceral systems, from the prison to the police and everywhere in between. And on that note, I will turn it back over to Aunt Sheree.
Thank you so much, Crystal. So for the next piece of our agenda, we're going to focus in on reform, what the reality of reform is in our city, the many attempts at reform. And the reason why we're going over this is because part of what the government, part of what the narrative will be that they will try to sell you is that this is something that must happen and this is something that will work if we try. But due to the long history of studies and attempts and information sharing and ways that the Fraternal Order of Police has fought at every turn, the ways that people have attempted to enforce checks and provide safety for communities, the way that they resist this effort tooth and nail has shown us that reform is not going to be effective against an institution that fundamentally is built and structured to oppress and to maintain oppression. So in order to talk a little bit about this history as well as some of the current context for the police and how they are maneuvering themselves in order to maintain their position as an oppressive institution, I'm going to bring up Salim Holberg and I'm going to bring up Devrin to speak to some of the history of the Philadelphia Police Department specifically, and also some of the work that they are doing in the present that is only going to continue to reinforce these harmful structures in our communities.
Thank you, Aunt Sheree. And good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on a Friday night to join us. I'm going to talk first a little bit about the history of reform in Pennsylvania, and also the failure of reform. You could trace back the history of attempts to reform the Philadelphia Police Department in Philadelphia to the birth of the Philadelphia Police Department in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Police Department was essentially established as a political arm of the city's political machine. And the rise in the Philadelphia Police Department, its primary function in the 1800s was to prevent Black people from voting, to disenfranchise Black people in Philadelphia. One of the earliest incidents of the police being used as a tool of state violence against communities of color, Black people in Philadelphia, is when police, in cooperation with a white mob, attacked an abolitionist town hall in the 1800s, in the 1830s. They set the building on fire. They beat Black people going there to advocate an end to slavery. And the people who were actually advocating freedom, advocating justice were the ones who were arrested. So that gives you an idea of Philadelphia Police Department's origins. Also, in the 1870s, the Philadelphia Police Department was unleashed at a time when Black communities around the country were exercising their right to vote. And when I say right to vote, for our people, the right to vote was a right to self-determination. It was a means of political power, and the police were used to suppress this. So in 1870, on election day, the police were unleashed with a white mob to beat Black voters who were standing in line to vote for Black politicians and Black advocates for their community. In 1871, on election day, once again in South Philly, police were unleashed on the Black community, Black voters who were waiting in line. And for many of us who have been to events at the Octavius Cato statue, and whose Octavius Cato resonates with us, he was killed on this day when police attacked Black voters. He was killed by a member of that mob that, in cooperation with police, attacked Black voters. Octavius Cato was returning home from voting, from being out there defending Black voters, and he was shot in the back of his head on his way home in South Philadelphia. So the history of police in Philadelphia from its origins was a tool, it was an instrument to oppress our communities, to stunt our political development and power. As early as the 1870s, it was so bad in Philadelphia that Black community members started the Association for the Protection of Colored People, because Black people were being beaten, oppressed by police. The community decided that it needed a response to that. In 1924, a comprehensive study was done that showed that widespread and systematic racism and discrimination exists in the Philadelphia Police Department. In 1952, the University of Penn did another comprehensive study about the widespread use of abuse and discrimination in the Philadelphia Police Department. Recommendations were put forward from both of these studies. Nothing happened. In 1958, and this is very important, Philadelphia became the first city in the country to establish a civilian police review board because of the abuse, beatings, and killings of Black people in Philadelphia. However, as soon as this was started, the FOP waged the legal battle against it and got an injunction that eventually gutted much of its powers. In 1964, Philadelphia experienced the Columbia Avenue riots, which was the result of Black police officers pulling a pregnant woman out of a car for a simple traffic stop and beating her on Columbia Avenue, which is now Cecil B. Moore Avenue. Philadelphia rose up in riots for 3 days because of that. They issued a report that advocated community policing, better policing, the outlawing the chokehold. If you look at the recommendations from that report that was released in the mid-60s, and then look at all of the recommendations the past 50 years, you will see that they are the same recommendations, with the exception of body cameras that have come about. But none of this has stopped police brutality and police violence. In 1967, police attacked students who were advocating for Black Studies program and to wear their hair in accordance with Black culture. Frank Rizzo sicked the police on them. In 1969, Frank Rizzo was successful in abolishing, think of that term, abolishing the Police Civilian Review Commission. Now, people get upset with us when we talk about abolishing the police, right? We want to abolish an agency that has shown since its inception that it cannot be reformed, and we want to replace it. And this is very important. We want to replace it with something that serves our community, a safety model that serves our community. But the police were successful in abolishing the very community commission that was to stop police brutality, police terror in our communities. So this is something that a lot of people do not understand. And I would urge people to read the book Up South, which has a very good history of policing in Philadelphia. But if we go into the 70s, Philadelphia police officers killed so many people in the 1970s without accountability that the Justice Department brought the first ever lawsuit in the nation against the Philadelphia Police Department. Okay, so Philly has a distinction of being the first city to have a civilian commission review commission for police, but also being the first police department in the country to be sued by the United States Justice Department because racism and violence against our communities was so rampant, right? That eventually was gutted by Ronald Reagan, right? So our communities, and we don't have to resurrect, although we are, the tragedy of the Move family in Philadelphia, how there's never been accountability for not just 1985 when the police dropped a bomb and killed children in Move, but also for when police attacked Move in 1979, right? There's never been accountability for this war on the Move organization, right? So we have tried time and time again. Even Fast Eddie Rendell in the early 90s resurrected the police civilian commission, which we exist today. As soon as it was established, the first thing the FOP did was file a lawsuit against it, but they also instructed all of their officers not to cooperate with the commission. So that's something that is important to understand, that we can continue to use examples of attempts at reforming the police. And to be honest with you, if you look every 10 years or so, the Justice Department sued the city of Philadelphia again in 2012 for rampant police shootings in our communities, right? Every attempt to reform policing has failed. And so if that is the outcome of every attempt, then the only successful thing that we can do is abolish it and then replace it with an agency or a model that actually serves our community. So it's when we're talking about police reform, we're not talking about it in a vacuum. We have over 100 years of why reform does not work in Philadelphia when it comes to the police.
Thanks for that, Salim. Yeah, I think we've talked about the history of policing, right? And so we have police that basically have stated, and the current idea around policing for a lot of people in a lot of different communities is that police are there to keep us safe. But everything that Salim has talked about is talking about how even since the beginning of the police department, they have actually been tools of oppression by the city of Philadelphia. And in the United States, they have been just a tool of oppression by the state more broadly, right? So what I want to talk about today is talking about a few programs, specifically group violence intervention, which has been introduced in the Philadelphia Police Department as a way for them to reform some of their common practices while also, quote unquote, trying to keep communities safe. And basically, the point of what I'm about to say is that the group violence intervention program is more of the same white supremacist tools that is used to surveil our communities, and actually presents a very real danger to our communities, specifically to black folks who are just trying to live their lives, right? To begin, I cannot overstate enough that surveillance is not safety. Cameras, biometric surveillance like facial recognition, predictive police technology, and in general, police monitoring our communities is based in a colonial English surveillance culture where it's believed that lower classes of people, at that time, poor people, are inherently criminal, immoral, and sexually deviant, and that rich, affluent people were basically charged with ensuring their piety and godliness by monitoring their actions and quote unquote snitching to authorities when needed. And because this country was stolen from the indigenous peoples who originally were here, and was built upon by values of white supremacy and the hatred of the poor. The society that arose from those English colonizers relies heavily on surveillance to exert control over, namely, Black, Indigenous folks, non-whites, and non-Christians, right? For example, the child welfare system, social services, and also law enforcement all rely on very intricate and complicated systems of surveillance to exert control over our communities. Example of this is the fact that for years, for probably the last 100 years or so, or since we've gotten here, Black women, Black children have been abused and taken away from their families, taken out of their families at the will of white supremacists who are in power. So when we look at GVI, group violence intervention, through the lens of surveillance, Philadelphia's this program is a surveillance program that is masquerading as an effort to move needed resources to folks in the community who have been identified as likely to either commit harm or be victimized by harm. So what does that mean for this program, right? The Philadelphia Police Department uses surveillance to identify people who are at high risk of perpetuating harm, like I just said, and who are typically considered to be engaged in gang activity. The city describes this program as being as surgical as a knife, right? But it's more like a shotgun. And what it does is the Philadelphia Police Department will go in, they'll use their predictive policing technology, they'll use their surveillance cameras that are almost always in Black and brown neighborhoods, right? Or if they're not in Black and brown neighborhoods, they're located downtown where Black and brown people are surveilled more for being in those spaces, right? Um, and then what they'll do is once they've identified a person or a group of people who they deem to be a threat, they will call those people in. The DA, the courts, the police department, and a few other head officials will call those people in and say, if you or anybody in your crew commits any crime, we will charge all of you, right, for a crime. We are going to make sure all of you are feel the weight of the criminal justice system on your necks. And so what that turned into during the first iteration of the program is grandmothers being threatened for their utilities to be shut off in the middle of the winter, people being coerced into into saying that they've done crimes that they might not have done. All of these things being perpetuated under this guise of a program that is supposed to be progressive, right? And so the other half of this program is where the social services that the city has at its disposal are then used to be like a carrot. They offer the people who are part of this program, who are surveilled as a part of this program, these social services, saying, we understand that life is hard, so here are some services for you that should help you not have to be doing the things that you're doing. When in reality, in both iterations of this program, back a few years ago, I believe in 2017, when it was first done, the programs that they offered were inadequate. They were under-resourced, and they did little to actually speak to the lived conditions and the cultural, the lived conditions and the issues that people in our communities are facing on a day-to-day because of the systemic racism and poverty that is inherent with redlining and that long history. And then in this latest iteration of the program, what has happened is the city has actually failed to actually fund these programs, right? So in essence, they are offering the same old tired social services to deal with issues that are much larger than any singular agency can mitigate, right? We need structural change. We need abolition. We need to uproot the police, the police department, right? And many other ancillary agencies right, and replace it with something that is able to move resources to our communities, that is controlled by our communities, in order for us to start talking about how we actually feel safe. Because right now, the only thing that is being offered is the police department. But in reality, that's not. They're not actually there for all the reasons that Salim named prior. They're not actually there to make us feel safe. They're there to protect property. They're there to stand guard at your local Lowe's. They're there to make sure that white supremacy is alive and kicking, but they're not there for Black life, and they're just marginalizing our communities and oppressing us. And yeah, and they're just oppressing us in the long run.
Thank you both for that context. So now we are going to transition into more into like the current state of our police, not our police department, of the police department, and go over some of the reasons why reform has been so ineffective. And part of the reason why that is the case is because we have to contend with the Fraternal Order of Police. So I'm going to ask Salim to continue to provide context on who they are, why it is important that they are abolished, and then we can continue to go into the rest of our demands regarding total abolition in our city.
Thank you, Aunt Ray. I think an important point to understand about the FOP is that the FOP does not exist to serve or protect our communities. The FOP exists to serve and protect police, specifically police who are accused or actually do harm to our communities. That is their role. I often like to tell people, and I see that there are a lot of organizers who are, on this broadcast and also reviewing it. And I think that's great, because an explanation of what the FOP does is the FOP are essentially the way that those of us who organize to build power and empower our communities, the FOP are the organizers of the community of police to build their power while suppressing any threat to their community, which is the police. This is why, if you look at every turn of reform in Philadelphia, even reform as minor as firing a police officer who takes a bribe, right? Firing a police officer who commits a sexual assault. The FOP has opposed that. And one thing about the FOP, they are good at what they do. A study showed that in a 3-year period, they were successful in reversing 3/4 of the recommendations to either fire, reprimand, or suspend police officers. And that's because they have power. And so if you look at what they did to the Philadelphia's first civilian police commission in 1958, they successfully gutted it. And then 10 years later, right, they abolished it. So the police, the Fraternal Order of Police, gets upset and pissed off with us because we advocate police abolition, or we use the hashtag abolish police. But they were abolitionists when it came to the Civilian Review Board, because they abolished it. It was gone, period. When it was resurrected in 1993, the first thing they did, they sued it. The same way that Donald Trump found a love affair with John McNesby, the reason why is because they both share a common trait, in it that they are habitual lawsuit filers when it comes to someone threatening their power or not having their way. That's the sense of entitlement that they have. And so that's what the Philadelphia Police Union did in 1993, and essentially gutted it so that it had no teeth. It had no investigative powers. When organizers and the community rose up this year and said, you know what, we want to get involved in the FOP negotiations, the contract negotiations with the city The community wants a voice, right? Many of us are advocating for more than a voice. We're advocating for the community to have a seat at the table, right? And we're advocating for the FOP to be abolished, right? What was the first thing the FOP did? They filed a lawsuit, right? To block public testimony by people from the community about why they believe police officers should be held accountable and that firing, discipline should be handled by the mayor and the city of Philadelphia and not determined by an arbitrator or the FOP. The first thing they did was file a lawsuit and attempt to obstruct it. So before you can do anything with police, whether it's defunding police, whether it's holding police accountable, whether it's police abolition, you have to go through the FOP because, again, they do not exist to serve our communities. They exist purely to serve and protect the community of police, and specifically police who are accused of wrongdoing and harm in our community. That is their function. That is their role. And so for that reason alone, they should be abolished.
Thank you so much for that continued context, Salim, about what exactly it is that we are dealing with and what exactly it is we are asking for. So we're going to continue with this exploration of our demands as Crystal laid out in the beginning. We have a few things that we want to touch on. Salim just really explained part of why we are gathering our energy in order to resist the FOP, because they are committed to resisting at every turn any form of accountability that we attempt to leverage against them. They're committed to maintaining this opaque environment where they can negotiate in secret for their own protection, negotiate in secret for their own funding, and really negotiate so that they can withdraw themselves from the responsibility of actually being accountable to the people of this city. So it's important that we have these conversations, and I want to, now we're going to transition into the next demand, which is protection for Black Philadelphia. So we've seen, based on the history that we've laid out and the conversations that are being had, that protection in the way that we are looking for it is not going to be something that the Philadelphia Police Department is going to be able to provide. Fundamentally, based on the history of the organization itself, and also because of the fact that they are not responsive to the attempts that have been made in order to make them accountable to the harm that they cause. In 2020, like the fact that we are still dealing with death at the hands of police, and the fact that it's not a matter of them knowing what to do, like there's been information, there's been provided trainings, all these things have been put forth as solutions. We had Charles Ramsey, who helped Barack Obama put together the vision for the 21st century policing and what it should look like in 2015. So they are not an institution that is poised for protection. So what that means for us is that we have to embody protection for ourselves. Moreover, we were in a situation in Philadelphia where there were people who are white supremacists, people who are coming to our city armed and threatening to post up in West Philadelphia and wherever else they may be able to find somebody and inflict harm or pose a threat to Black people who are in our city. And what we are here to say today is that that's not something that we are going to stand for or allow, and that should not be something that is condoned or allowed by anybody or any government in the city or any official in the city. But what we saw was that the Philadelphia Police Department was taking a stance of these people who were coming in to be harmful or to be violent. And instead of protecting the people who were around them and who they are supposed to be there to protect and serve. So we fundamentally have a problem with this institution in the way that they are poised against us. And so our demand about protection for Black Philadelphia establishes, one, that we have the right to defend ourselves, and that we believe that we should have the institutionalized ability to exercise that right. And also specifically, we are organizing in order to make sure that we keep ourselves safe from not only the physical threat of violence, but also structural instances of violence that keep us in the state where violence becomes a thing we have to deal with in communities. Not being able to feed yourself regularly, not being able to have access to schools and institutions that are, first of all, viable and safe in order to breathe in, like they're not ventilated, they're not air conditioned, not being able to have access to quality education. All these things are structural racism and violence that continue to keep us unprotected by a system that is supposed to be valuing our lives. So we are here to say again, as Black Philly Radical Collective, that our city deserves protection, our people deserve protection, and we're going to keep making demand until it is realized. So I'm going to bring on, let's go back to Brother Gabe so he can talk about ending criminalization of resistance.
Family, where we've had for the past several years many amazing victories, not only here in Philadelphia, but across the country. The movement for decades has responded to the resistance, which said that they must lock up those of us, those generals, those warriors, those soldiers. They learned a lesson from our phenomenal ancestors of the past who gave their life for this movement. And their action or process was to lock us up. And for years, from the 60s and 70s and 80s on, we saw a legacy of freedom fighters locked away in cages for 20 years, for 30 years, for 40 years, and yes, even in some cases, 50 years. And as that happened, right, because they saw the uprisings of our response as they assassinated, our kings, Martin King, Malcolm X, so many others, they chose that as a pathway to quell the movement. But as we all know, due to decades of being in the streets, decades of petitions, decades of political education, decades of letter writing, decades of visiting the prisons themselves, decades of supporting families in our communities, decades of writing, making the movement global, making the movement connected by virtue of idea, by virtue of ideology, by virtue of our just connected experiences. We were able to free who? We were able to free Herman Wallace. We were able to free Oscar Lopez Rivera. We were able to free Chelsea Manning. We were able to free Albert Woodfox. We were able to free Robert King. We were able to free the Move 9 in the names of Janine Africa, Janet Africa, Eddie Africa, Delbert Africa, Chuck Africa, Mike Africa Sr., Debbie Africa. We were able to free Sekou Odinga. We were able to free all these individuals, Herman Bell, and just this past month, Jalil Muttaqin. And so what the system wants more than anything else, as they've seen the growth and the expansion of the Black Lives Matter movement, not only in Philadelphia, not only in Pennsylvania, and not only in the United States, but a global movement for Black power and Black support, Black sovereignty, Black liberation. They want to lock us up until 2070. Their position is this: if they can create a new generation of political prisoners, they will do just that. And from Ferguson to now, we have seen many freedom fighters get locked up. Those who have exemplified the resistance necessary to be free as a people, to be free. That's what they're fighting for. But what the system wants to do is give them a charge on the books that'll put them in the cage until 2060, 2070, 2080, 2090, right? And so we talk about our dear brother and comrade, who is somebody who we love for his advocacy, somebody who we love for his ability to connect to young people, somebody who we love for his ability to be a phenomenal orator, somebody who we love because we understood his connection to his family and his love for his family and his love for his culture. Ant Smith is the embodiment of what is great about movement. Ant Smith represents what is great about the struggle. Ant Smith represents what is great about Black people. He's somebody who learned to pursue his passions, his skills, and talents and build on them, nurture them, and more importantly, surround himself with the folks who will continue to motivate him to be his best self. And so when we think about Ant Smith and what he means to the movement here in Philadelphia, but around the world, as a member of Philly for Real Justice, real meaning racial, economic, and legal, Ant Smith is somebody who we should all be fighting for, because a fight for Ant Smith is a fight for ourselves. A fight for Ant Smith is a fight for the Black community. A fight for Ant Smith is a fight for Black liberation. A fight for Ant Smith is a fight for the Black family. A fight for Ant Smith is a fight for truth. A fight for Ant Smith is a fight for the future. And so when the comrades and the family and the team and the brothers and sisters, siblings, the family came out to the county to free our brother just a few days ago, that was an important and historic victory for the struggle, because the first step was to bring him home. That's only the first step, though. The second step is to continue to push, because we know that the system is going to continue to try to quell and to repress and suppress this movement. And so we want to make sure that we submit to them that they must drop the charges immediately. But more importantly, whenever that court case does come around, we know that our brother's going to come home, because he's innocent today and he's going to be innocent tomorrow. And we will continue to fight for all of those, not only here in Philadelphia, but across the country, as they seek to repress resistance. All it's going to do is make us go harder, stronger, and with more Black power. Free Ant. And put the free ants in the messages too. Put the free ants. I want to see all free ants and power fists all up in the comments. All free ants, y'all. All free ants. That's what we do right now.
Free Ant for certain. Thank you, brother. So, speaking, as we continue this conversation about incarceration, I'm going to talk about just overall ending this criminalization of Black people in general, and fighting against and working to eliminate and abolish carceral systems that are currently trapping Black people who are experiencing the compounding effects of poverty and lack of resources and being underserved by the institutions and structures that are around them. We already know and has been covered extensively throughout the media that Black people are incarcerated at an exponential rate beyond what can ever even be considered fair or legal or humane. We are pushing against death by mass incarceration or death by incarceration period, where people are put away in cages and then sentenced to experience and live the rest of their lives away from society, where they could return to us and return to their people. Instead, they are locked away as if they don't retain their humanity, even though they have committed something that people feel like should be held against them for the rest of their lives, even within the context of a court system and a structural system that we know has biased, has racism embedded in it, and also is unjust. So along with those things, we demand the dismissal of warrants and cash bail and all these other structures that are designed and poised to punish poor people and people who don't have the resources to pay the money that's necessary in order to secure their freedom. We're demanding an end to parole and probation and all these systems that keep people caught up in order to continue to feed this monster that is the prison system and the incarceration system that we're dealing with in America. the criminalization of mental illness, especially on top of the fact, as we're thinking about our brother Walter Wallace, the fact that he was not able to get the things that he deserved and the assistance that he deserved, and it cost him his life, is a tragedy. And it is not just on the hands of the Philadelphia Police Department. It is on the hands of everybody who is determined to hoard wealth and hoard resources away from communities that need it, so that we can live freely and live healthily and live with the institutions and services that we need in order to access wellness. And on the same hand, or in the same direction, we are demanding that children and families that have to deal with the Department of Human Services, families that are separated by the state without being allowed the resources in order to repair themselves and stay together and get what they need in order to be a thriving whole unit, that is injustice. And we should not exist right now in a system that is separating families and allowing these families to be separated from each other without any true possibility for restoration. On that same hand, as we're thinking about families that are separated, Philadelphia should hold firmly to its stance as a sanctuary city and should not be cooperating with ICE in any way. And we will be there at every turn in order to make sure that the people who are immigrants and vulnerable populations in our city do not have to deal with the threat of being snatched from their homes or having to be taken away from their families for reasons that are not justified. Finally, we are pushing for and continue to advocate for the decriminalization of sex work and ending the stigma against sex workers in our city who are unjustly persecuted, arrested, and not able to just live safely because of the threat of the people who are supposed to be keeping them safe. So yeah, that is all I wanted to say about ending or abolishing carceral systems. And now we're going to bring up Yane Indigo, who's going to talk about ending the military occupation of communities.
Thank you so much. And I just want to appreciate everyone who's spoken so far, because this has been just a really life-giving discussion where we're speaking about the things that we need and that we need for our freedom and that we deserve. And one of the things that sometimes may not be clear, because we are born into these systems and into this structure that we've been living in, and they slowly raise the temperature on us. So sometimes it's hard for us to feel that heat. And so often many of us don't even actually recognize that the Black community here in the United States is an occupied community. And what does that mean? So an occupied community, when you think of the reality of war occupation, that is when you have an outside entity that takes authority and uses military might to have authority over your life and has the ability to engage you in any way desired with any kind of harm and with impunity. And that is the reality that we live in the Black community here in the United States and in many other areas around the world, colonized areas around the world, where imperialism is existing. In Philadelphia, we have multiple forms of police that are showing up in many of our communities. You have the private polices of the universities, you have SEPTA police, you have the regular City of Philadelphia police, and these entities show up and work collaboratively and work also independently. You know, the Philadelphia Housing Authority will go usurp the process that is the I'm sorry, I got distracted because our brother Dawood is listening, and I just want to offer greetings to Brother Dawood, who is one of our leaders and a resistor who is behind the walls. I really just want to offer greetings to Brother Dawood, who's listening on the phone right now. But the reality is that we have a system where a person, if they're getting evicted, is supposed to go through a process to be removed. PHA is a landlord that has private police and is able to go into people's homes and remove them without even going through this kind of a process. We have a reality where, it's normal to us today to see police walking through the streets and actually have and have riot gear on, and have all kinds of weaponry. Police don't have to have weapons. There are police in many parts of the world that don't have weapons. They don't have to have weapons. We have police and police systems that come into our communities with actual war weaponry, war armory. So there's programs like the Department of Defense's 1033 program, which actually provides funding to transfer military grade equipment from the actual military into our local police departments. And sometimes we think about that and we focus on those equipments being brought into our specific communities. But the reality is that in addition to Philadelphia, where there has been military grade equipment transferred into our Philadelphia police departments, these weapons are also transferred into other parts of our state known as Pennsylvania. So think about where, if there is an issue, when we have like things like rebellion and our righteous rebellion to fight against the harm and the violence that the state has been imposing against our communities, we are responded to with massive military equipment. Where is that going to come from? That comes not only from within our city, but from the surrounding cities, from the surrounding counties around Philadelphia. So the transference of these military grade equipments into local police departments, they don't only happen where Black people are, they happen where in proximity to where Black people are, so that they can bring all of that equipment into our communities in order to put down any of our insurgencies. And that is what the police actually manifest as. The police operate as a counterinsurgency force. So the reality is that we have every right. We have every right to fight for that which we are entitled to as human beings. We are entitled to be able to be at peace. We are entitled to have joy. We are entitled to have food. We are entitled to have housing. And it's not actually true that people are entitled to actually hoard resources away from us and force us to have a certain kind of wealth, because there's a range of ways that wealth manifests in our communities and in our humanity. Our wealth manifests through our intelligence, through our creativity, through our innovation, but we have to somehow sell those things in order to secure this fake currency called the dollar, in order to be able to obtain things that we should not have to pay for and sell labor for. And if we decide we want to come together to resist this reality, to resist this which has been imposed upon us, then what do we do but face police? The police are there to dampen and to diminish and to violently, if necessary, and often even if not necessary, just because that's their role and often they enjoy it. The police is there in order to counter our insurgencies. And that is the reason why we continue to suffer and why we continue to live under this system, because every time an individual or a community works to transform our reality, they are met with brute resistance through the occupying forces of the military, and the military, including the local military that is called the police. So we are consistently targeted with military grade equipment by SWAT teams, by hyper militarized police teams. And now Trump has established through the Department of State an actual program called Operation Relentless Pursuit. And just listen to the name of that, Operation Relentless Pursuit, where they intend to pursue us unrelentingly if we make any effort to fight against injustice and violence that is perpetuated against our communities. That is the reason that they go after individuals like our very good, beautiful, brilliant, bright light brother, Ant, because Ant spoke love and light and power into our community, and they had to come against us, and they're using these tactics. The Operation Relentless Pursuit provides funds in order to create more of a collaboration between local, state, and national departments in order to better criminalize our community. So we have to stand up and fight against the occupation of our community, the military occupation of our community, and we have to stand up and fight also against the programs that they have in place in order to empower that occupation. We cannot allow ourselves to believe that it is normal to see police officers walking around casually in our communities in the kind of gear that they have. They should be as human as we are, and they should be as vulnerable as we are, so that they will be as respectful as they try to demand that we be, while they are using their ammunitions in order to hurt, harm, and even murder us. Every 24 hours, a Black person is murdered, and that's just in the United States. And when you expand beyond this colony to the colonies around the world, then those numbers increase exponentially. We demand an end to the military occupation of the Black community, and we demand that that happen now. Thank you. Free Ant.
Mostaf. And in order to expand on the last demand that we're going to be discussing today, I'm going to bring Salim back up, and he's going to discuss why we are demanding the swift firing of killer cops.
Thank you, Yane. When it comes to the firing of police officers who kill people from our community, this all ties into two segments that we discussed earlier, and that is the failure of police reform in not just Philadelphia, but in the United States, and also the power of the Fraternal Order of Police. These two obstacles are what stands in our path to families like Walter Wallace's family getting justice. And for us, let's be straight, justice for us is not police officers being fired. It's not police officers being placed in prison, because systematic racism and state violence is so entrenched that just placing one or two police officers in prison will not bring our community justice. Justice for us is abolition, but abolition is in the process. And in that transition, or on that road to abolition, justice can, to some family members or to some people, be police officers being fired, police officers being charged. In the past 50 years, seven police officers have been charged with murder for killing unarmed people in our community. Only one has been convicted, and that was in the 70s. And the only reason he was convicted was because he pled guilty to manslaughter. However, the judge then threw the manslaughter conviction out. So that's just something, to think about. 50 years, 7 times. Now, mind you, the Philadelphia police killed 22 people in 1 year in 2012. That was in 1 year. So we're talking of, in 50 years, only 7 have been charged. 1 has been found guilty only because he pled guilty to a lesser degree of manslaughter. And then the judge threw the manslaughter charge out and he walked. So there has been no reckoning, no accountability at all. So when it comes to firing police officers, we feel that at the least, that is what should be done when they kill unarmed people, at the least. We shouldn't have to wait for endless rounds of investigations that will only be blocked by the Fraternal Order of Police, that will only be stalled by the internal division within the police department, internal affairs division within the police office that is responsible for investigating police shootings and abuse by police. We shouldn't have to wait because we know that those mechanisms don't work. They're obstructed. So Philadelphia is establishing a police review commission again. You know, for us, does this have teeth? That's something that we are going to, as a community, have to ensure that we have our voices and our people and our communities at the table organizing around this. But we need to be on the streets demanding police officers be fired immediately when it comes to harm in our communities, and that they be given the same treatment that we are given when we are accused of harm and offense or wrongdoing in our community. We don't have a cooling off period of 48 hours before the police talk to you and question you, right? You are charged immediately. So, you know, that is something that we want done. We want them swiftly fired. And until they are swiftly fired, you know, as a community, we'll be in the streets. We need to be in the streets. We need more 52nd streets. We need them to see that when you come into our community and harm us, and that you don't fire the people that harm us, and you don't hold them accountable, we have a right as a community to go into the street and demand that there will be consequences if you don't do this. There must be consequences when we do not have justice. So those are some reasons why we must push for swift firing of police officers, not as a means of justice, but as one of the means to the process of justice and the process of abolition. Thank you, Yanni. Sorry.
No, Matt, thank you so much, Salim. So we do want to take a few moments to open up the conversation to folks who are watching and in the community. So we're going to be watching the comments. If folks have questions or things that they want to pose to those of us who are here, we are here to engage in dialogue and answer questions. And then we are going to move on to next steps as far as like calls to action, upcoming actions, and ways that folks can help support this movement toward abolition that's currently taking place in our city.
Awesome. So yeah, we had. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, you're good. You're here. This is good. All right. So, Deb, I guess we can. Oh, wait, we got a question. Okay. So, Tasia asks, even as we abolish prisons, is there something more than firing to hold them accountable and work toward justice? They have power beyond what the public possesses, and it seems they should be required to engage in some reparative measure that is balanced with the power they hold. Does anybody have thoughts about this question? So I think, Tasia, to start, we, in addition to asking that they be fired, one thing that we were thinking through is that they should not be allowed to just kind of go on with their pensions and live their lives, though that money or that accumulated resource should be redistributed because they've taken a life from the community. So that money should go to the family first, and then beyond that should be distributed in order to repair the things that we lost. So I think that that is one thing that we talked through or like thought through as far as solutions are concerned, for how we continue to maintain accountability. But there does need to be some sort of series or actions that are taken in order to really bring home the fact that we're not going to continue to stand by, or you're not going to be able to just walk off once you've killed somebody. So thank you, Tasia. Does anybody else have thoughts?
I just want to say that thanks, Sheree, because that is a part of our demand of the swift firing of killer cops, is that if an officer is convicted, so whether they are convicted or not, we are demanding that they are fired. You've murdered someone, you shouldn't be walking around any longer with a badge and a gun. If you are convicted, then yes, your pensions at the very beginning, in addition to whatever time you may spend while we're still within the context of these carceral systems, by the time we're out of the context of the carceral systems, there won't even be police anymore anyway. The pensions should be seized and transferred to the victims' families. In addition, though, what I wanted to say, Tasia, is that we are, as the Black Philly Radical Collective, are members of this community, and all of us are a part of the solution. And so I just want to encourage that we all be thinking about what the solutions are to these things. When we have these questions, that we engage our own community with that we talk to each other and other organizers, because what we don't want is to create the sense that we are here to be the solutionaries and to replace like elected officials or anyone like that. We commit ourselves to this organizing work as members of the community, in expecting more and more of our members of the community to be a part of this process and to be working with us to collectively find the answers to these questions. And so that's one thing I just wanted to encourage, that you remember also, Tasia, that you are also one of the sources of the answers as well, even though we do appreciate that this is a question and answer moment.
And one thing I would just like to share briefly too, circling back to the swift firing of killer cops, is that right now the FOP and the city are in a negotiation process, dealing with binding arbitration. And that arbitration is often what allows police officers to get their jobs back or be held unaccountable for killing people. So that is something that I would urge folks to keep their eye out on and get involved in. If you want to learn more about that, you could just DM me on Facebook, and I could plug people into some of the movements that are going to be organizing around this. But I really believe that it's very important that we have Black organizers in these spaces, because this issue is impacting our communities disproportionately. So we definitely need more of our folks in this fight against the FOP.
Have resisted abolitionist movements successfully. Why should we believe that it can happen now? So I'm not sure if anybody has a thought on that. Since the police have resisted abolitionist movements successfully, why should we believe that it can happen now?
Because the power of the people don't stop.
I think that's one thing. I think part of why I'm encouraged in this moment is that there have been several things that have happened that I did not think would happen. So, Minneapolis made a commitment to disbanding their police department. Los Angeles made a commitment to defunding their police department. So I think across our country, like even as we are seeing and have seen resistance to abolition in the past and resistance to reform in the past, there's been this galvanizing energy of victories that have been won. So I'm feeling in this moment more hopeful instead of just more like pessimistic or apathetic about the possibilities that we can see, because there's been movement and because we are becoming more organized, I think, not less. And I think that because this language is catching on, this idea is catching on, and there have been successes around our country regarding what abolition can be and what a full defunding of a police department can look like, I think that in this moment we should be pushing as hard as we can, not with the mind that we may not make it, but with full hope of impossibility, that we will make it and that we will see some change happen this time.
And were you gonna go, Dev? I'm sorry. And also too, I think that this is really important when it comes to abolition. Abolition is not happening on the next budget cycle. Abolition is not happening on the next election cycle. Abolition is a process. It's a generational struggle, right? And so that is very important for us to understand, that we're not looking for Joe Biden to be an abolitionist. We're not looking for Kamala Harris, Obama, whoever to be that agent of change. That's going to have to be us. And this is the ultimate dilemma or challenge on the horizon, that if you believe that abolition of police and prisons and poverty can exist in America as it is, without abolishing the social contract that has governed America, the United States, then you are living in a different world. Abolition is abolition against white supremacy, abolition against police, abolition against prisons. So this is a process that we have to undertake and understand that it's generational.
Let's see if we can try to get to a couple more questions that are
comment.
Okay, and then we're going to try to get to a couple other questions as well.
I'm bringing in the questions as well, so got that. One of the things that I think is really important to center here is that hope is an actual discipline, right? This is a quote from Miriam Kaba that I love so much. Hope is not just some sort of pie in the sky idea that is removed and divorced from our everyday realities. It is a praxis. It is a political praxis. It is the actual manifestation of our abolitionist freedom dreams. And we have to grow that capacity within ourselves and with each other. And that is not to say that we don't recognize that our fight for abolition is actually a fight for abolition to be realized for the first time. Right? We have this fallacy that we have actually seen abolition take place, but we've never actually seen abolition take place, right? When you look at how slavery was transformed into Jim Crow, into mass incarceration, when you see that it was actually slaveholders, people who enslaved our ancestors, who received reparations for slavery, you know that we have never seen an actual abolitionist process be realized. However, we have to believe that this is possible. We actually have to believe that we can win in order to be able to imagine a world in which Black people won't be shot down by the police from Philadelphia to Lagos in Nigeria. And so I think, as hard to imagine as these things might be, we have to commit ourselves to the hope that these things will be realized, particularly because I don't think 6 months ago we would have ever thought we would be having a conversation at this scale about defunding, let alone abolition. And so these things speak to the fact that we are winning, right? We're winning because we say that we are winning, we see that we are winning, and we are committed to our freedom dreams being realized. So I wanted to bring in a question here that I see that says, and this is from TJ Dean. What's up, TJ? Look into the future. What are the alternatives to policing that we can begin to explore and promote to our communities? And I think this is a nice segue from our last question.
I'd like to mention, I think one of the first things that I think we need to recognize is the idea of police is supposed to be like a response to crime. And so one alternative to policing is actually transforming the realities that create crime. So people steal food because they're hungry, right? People engage in a lot of the activities of that are considered criminal and often considered violent because of the actual violent conditions that they are seeking to survive. And so when we as a community take responsibility for the conditions that our community members are living within, when we stop looking at other people, if we have, you think about it, if we have a neighbor and our neighbor is hungry and we know that they don't have the food they need, we have to accept that we have some responsibility for allowing our neighbor, our family member, ultimately to be left hungry and then to be left desperate when they come out in the street in order to try to address that desperation, and then they end up attacking another member of our community or even ourselves. We can actually take that responsibility. That's one of the reasons why we do things like we feed members of our community, why we have groups like Food Not Bombs that show up and actually feed, while we have mutual aid programs that feed our community. So addressing the needs of our community is one of the ways that we significantly diminish the need for responses to crime. Then when there are still those minimal amounts of criminal activities, we can work together still as a collective community in order to address those issues as well. A lot of times, if there is some sort of criminal activity and there is not some sort of need, then there is a mental health issue. So we can increase the responses and the support around mental health. We can, most of the time, if there are escalations happening in the community, if we have members who are of that community who are getting involved in those in that situation, they're better prepared and better able to de-escalate those situations. And there are multiple programs that are in place around the city that are small models of the ways that these things are done. I mean, from the food issue, like we just talked about, like Food Not Bombs or community garden programs, to issues that are explicitly around de-escalation and transformative justice programs. And one of the things that we are doing as a collective is we are working to deepen our relationship with individuals and organizations that are doing these kinds of work, and working to shift. When we're talking about defunding police, we want to defund the police. We want to take those resources and put them into the actual community organizers and frontline individuals in our communities who are doing this kind of work, so that we can expand that and resource the community-driven transformative work that actually responds to the needs of the community, including the minimal amounts of kind of criminal activity that happens when a community is well resourced and well cared for. So the alternatives to policing really belong within us. We have to go back to rebuilding community, to actually existing as a community, to taking responsibility, showing love and care to our community, and then showing up within our community in order to address any kinds of issues that are coming around. And there is a big question that tends to be out here around, like, what if there is violence, right? And what if there's violence, and what are people going to be able to do? And when it comes to that, I still go back to the fact, to what I said before, that we do also have to work collectively in order to identify the ways that we want to address some of these kinds of issues in a way that still keeps us healthy, that still keeps us safe, and that is caring based. And some of those answers are for us to build, but there are a lot of models that are already in place that we can tap into in order to and build those things out while we're working further on solutions.
What?
I wanted to also respond real quick. There are, like Yane just mentioned, there are people in Philadelphia who are currently working on both ends of what we would recognize as violent incidents. There are people who intervene before the incident takes place, and people who are here may be familiar with Cure Violence and that model of doing like on-site mediation in order to be preventative. And in instances where Cure Violence is funded and effective, they've seen success rates of up to upwards of 30%, where they're able to prevent violence from happening. But also on the other end, post-violent incident, if that is the case, there's people in Philadelphia who organize in order to make sure that they are there and can provide resources and work with the people who were involved in the incident, but also try to prevent any other retaliation or fallout that would happen as a result of these people not having access to what they need, or just feeling like there needs to be some sort of revenge stance taken. In other cases, in other cities, in Chicago, there are medics, people who are trained in communities who come and respond whenever there's like a first aid situation or something that's needed. There's trained mediators that come. There's people who are trained in like mental health de-escalation that come. In New York, there's a program, and some of these interventions are focused around more long-term solutions, but they work with people and they pair people who are who would be identified as like violence or have the capacity to engage in violence in the future with what they call a credible messenger, which is somebody who has been in the same type of situation, has maybe lived some of those same type of conditions, and is able to take this person under their wing and do mentoring. Exactly, Ujima Medics, thank you. Take that person under their wing and mentor them out of what can be some dangerous and fatal situations. And their success rate has been, I believe, like upwards of 80%. Like they have people, when you connect communities to each other, you're able to realize way more successful violence prevention than anything that the community or the police, would poise against us in the interest of trying to keep us safe. So the answer is definitely communities, and there are models around the country of communities themselves who have actualized their energy in order to care for each other. And that is what we are endeavoring to support here in Philadelphia and build here in Philadelphia.
Yeah, just real quick also, that ties into Verse Mega's question also about the alternatives, but also about the mental health resources or crisis response resources. I share all the time that, even in the case of Walter Wallace Jr., the number that most people don't know is 215-685-6440, which is a 24/7, 7-day-a-week mobile crisis line for mental health. Again, 215-685-6440. But more importantly than that, the question becomes, how do we create institutions ourselves? Because I can tell you right now, on every certain term that, that space, though good, is supremely understaffed. And so there's so much crisis in the city of Philadelphia and other cities that really, I always say, this is a war for the spirit and a war for the heart. We've been dealing with the pandemic for the past year. Black folks have been dealing with the 400-year pandemic of white supremacy. And that 400-year pandemic of white supremacy has impacted our minds in such a way that we have to give people something to lose. The brothers and sisters, and mostly brothers and young men that I work with in the prisons and juvenile facilities, all tell me all the time, hey, Mr. Brian, hey, Brother Gabe, I just have nothing to lose, man. And or B, it's just something was in my soul that just said to do. I just don't know. When your spirit is taken from you, when your heart is taken from you, when your mind is taken from you, your tongue, your tradition, your custom, you're left with an empty blank slate, and you have to build oneself up. And because as Black people, we've been so distorted and warped as far as who we are, it's taken us out of who we are. And so we have to give people something to live for, right? Something to lose, something to hope for, that sense of willingness to kind of go all out for oneself and one's collective. And that can only be done, in our opinion, or at least in my opinion, I'll say, through a complete redirection of one's education, a redirection of what it means to be mentally, emotionally well, but also a redirection of what it means to pursue one's passions and talents in the world. Vis-a-vis the old question, why am I born here, right? If to have people remind themselves that, because the culture says you're not even here for, matter of fact, you don't matter, right? There's no reason for you to even be here at all. That's why we got young folks out here trying to search for that question, and leaves them and sometimes to bad choices. And as Yane said, poverty gets weaponized, and there we have it, today.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing I would add, and in particular, thinking about like the demographic of folks, Black young males, as the city would call it, who are most at risk of being criminalized, of being either killed by gun violence or they say committing gun violence, right? Like, instead of one response that our city should have, that our community should have, is instead of sending in police with guns, instead of sending in police that are only going to offer jail, right? Like, one of the things that we need to be doing is, how do we move as communities? How do we move resources to these folks that are many of which who are experiencing poverty, right? And have experienced poverty for generations. How do we move money to those communities, right? And then taking a step back, looking at the programs that do move money to that population in general, right? Like, there are many organizations who are doing the work of violence prevention, that would fall under the auspice of violence prevention, that move money to young folks to be part of the programs, to then get development that they have not gotten because of the failure of the city of Philadelphia to fund our education, to feed our families, to provide opportunities, right? Because these are all things that the city of Philadelphia wasn't set up to do, for Black folks in general. So that's one thing that I wanted to add to the conversation. Yeah.
Real quick, Betsy PS question: how can we learn more about Philly political prisoners like Mumia Abu-Jamal? Thank you, Betsy. I work with Mobilization for Mumia. Please, family, go to Mobilization for Mumia, the number 4, Mobilization for Mumia, on Facebook. Just look at it online, Google Mobilization for Mumia. You can hear more about Mumia Abu-Jamal's case. One of the key parts that even Salim mentioned earlier is that the FOP did back the King's Bench order that has really kind of kept Mumia's case stuck right now in the state courts. But again, with December 9th coming up, with Mumia's case, it'll be going on 39 years of incarceration since December 9th, 1981. And so again, Mobilization number 4, Mumia, online. You can get more information about updates, how you can support. And also, we work with other efforts to free not only Mumia Abu-Jamal, but also Russell Maroon Schultz, also Jamil El-Amin, and many, many others, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country.
Okay, so we're going to start to move into our closing. Unless, Salim, if you wanted to speak a little bit to the issue of political prisoners and some of the work that's going on right now.
No, I think the only thing that I would add is that the Black Philly Radical Collective, BLM, Abolitionist Law Center, put together the Brick by Brick fundraiser for political prisoners. So that's something that people can contribute to support our political prisoners, not just on the inside, but also specifically our political prisoners who are coming home. And also that, in the future, we are going to be establishing the Jericho, Philadelphia chapter. So for folks to be on the lookout for that too, as well. And also too, one thing we would also ask, I don't want to take up too much space, but in this moment of police abolition and defunding police, let's just make sure that you know who our political prisoners are, who have been in prison for 50 years, who were fighting this same struggle against police in the 1960s and 1970s, and who are still in prison to this day. Russell Maroon Schultz, Fred Muhammad Burton, Mumia Abu-Jamal, Sundiata Acoli, just to name a few.
Thank you so much. So I know that there were a lot of questions that we didn't get a chance to discuss, but feel free to keep sharing. You can always reach us on Facebook and on our website, blackphillyradicalcollective.com. We are looking to continue this work. This will not be the last time that you hear from us on this platform. So stay plugged in. We will be continuing our fight toward abolition, and we want to now open up the space to talk about what's upcoming as far as this particular struggle, and also actions that are going to be taking place in order to move some of these things forward. So I want to go to Devin first to talk specifically about things that are moving as far as like what we can get behind. And then Yane is going to talk about ways to get involved and places where you can meet up with us.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah, I mean, in particular, thinking about some of the things that have happened recently, we have, of course, the murder of Walter Wallace by police, and then the subsequent decision by prominent members of city council and then the mayor to want to provide more funds to the police through the mid-year budget transfer process, which is both coming up. And so in addition to that, there's also a new process, which was mentioned earlier, thinking politically, there's a new process that was mentioned earlier around public comment on the FOP contract negotiations, which are starting now, right? And so we wanted to put this on folks' radar, because while this isn't the entirety of the movement, right? Like, we have to organize our communities to be able to stand up alternative systems to these structures. We still need to make sure that in the meantime, the city is not continuing to funnel millions of dollars into policing, right? So the first event, and I think I saw Judith in the chat from Reclaim, who I thank for creating this graphic, is the FOP police contract hearing, which is this Wednesday, November 18th at 10 a.m. And you need to sign up for public comment. The phone number to sign up is 215-686-0454. Again, that's 215-686-0454. You can also email eliza.alford@phila.gov. That's eliza.alford@phila.gov to sign up. And the deadline for that is this Tuesday. They will be discussing what the community wants to see out of the next FOP contract. And for additional context, about 90% of the Philadelphia Police Department's budget is actually the FOP contract. So it is something that's directly correlated with our ability to defund the police going forward. The next thing that's coming up is there's another hearing that is scheduled for the 2nd of December. And that is in particular a hearing that is going to include information about the close to $18 million that the city of Philadelphia is trying to give to police. That they have not announced how you can sign up for that, but it should be on our radar. And then finally, we will drop in the chat. There is a petition that we have partnered with Reclaim, with Amistad Law Project, and a few other notable organizations, calling on the firing of the officers who killed Walter Wallace, and also demanding that the city do not invest any more money in the police department for useless reforms that only make the police department more powerful. So definitely fill out that petition, get on our mailing list so that you can keep in contact and know what's coming up in the future. But that's all I have for my piece, so I'll pass it back to Anshere.
Great. So I'm going to thank you, Devin, for that overview. I'm also going to be sharing with everybody a list for further reading if you are interested in learning more about the sources that were used in order to put together this information for this abolitionist town hall. All of the sources that were used in order to provide information for you will be linked in the document that I'm going to post in the chat. But I'm going to turn it over now to Yane, who's going to wrap up our discussion and also talk about our upcoming actions and ways that you can continue to support the work of BPRC.
Thank you so much. And so, yeah, we've got several actions that are coming up. The next action that's coming up actually is tomorrow at Malcolm X Park, which is a location where we love to go and show up with our community. And at Malcolm X Park, we're going to be having an action that starts at noon. It's a rally and teach-in, and it is called The Power is the People. And there we're going to be talking more about these same kinds of subjects, and also doing some teaching, having a few workshops that are related to organizing, things that we've talked about here as it relates to supporting political prisoners, safety and security as connected to protection for Black Philadelphia, and organizing actions in general, the importance and the value and righteousness of resistance. And then all weekend, we are also going to we are inviting people to create mementos of love and support for the Wallace family. So one of the things that we know is that after the terrible travesty and murder of Walter Wallace, there's been a lot of energy and attention that have been at the Wallaces, in the Wallace's home and in the center of the Wallace family. And while there's all of that going on, of course, it's a major grieving moment, but it's also a very distracted moment. And when all of that calms down, that's when, and when it gets quiet, that's when it can get even more difficult, because you have to sit in that silence. And so we need to make sure that we don't forget to keep showing up for our family that has suffered this tragedy and this trauma. And so that's why we're inviting people to this weekend, put together some sort of memento of love and care and support, in support of the Wallace family, and to post that on your social media, and to include with that the hashtags long live Walter Wallace and love to Wallace family, love #2 Wallace family. And then also on Sunday, we will have we'll be having a replay of this very same abolitionist teaching. So for those of you who were here, who enjoyed the information, you can actually invite people to the watch party that will be hosted Sunday at 5 p.m. In order to help us spread the word and spread this information. Because the reason we put this together is because there are a lot of people who don't really understand what we're talking about when it comes to abolition, or they are confused about the vision for what life can look like when we abolish the systems that hurt, harm, and kill us. And so we want people to begin to be able to imagine beyond the current system that we have in place. And so please do share this and invite people to watch the replay of the live stream. And then I put in the comments. Oh, I didn't put it. It will be in the comments. The ways that you can financially support the Wallace family. As we know, the Wallace family, the murder of Walter Wallace Jr. happened right outside the house. When the family members walk out the house, I mean, there are times when his mom has had to cover her face because she just doesn't want to see that space again. Every time she walks out her door, she is confronted with that moment when her son was gunned down in front of her. And so they want to move, and they need to move. And so we are inviting the community to show up and support with your funds, with what you can afford, in order to support that need that needs to be met immediately for the family to be able to move away from that moment of trauma and begin to find some sort of peace, and to be able to move their way from this moment into the rest of their lives. So those are some things that people can engage in. And so we really hope that people will be able to come tomorrow to the action at Malcolm X Park. Again, that starts at noon. And please, when you come to us and say hi. There are times when members of the community and people who have come to things, they don't speak to us. You know, they stay hidden and they stay in the back, and maybe you feel like you're shy, but we do all of this work because we love our community. So we want to meet you. We want to interact with you. We want to hear your thoughts, and, you know, and see how you can get connected to the work that we're doing, and how we may be able to connect to things that you're doing as well. So please, when you come tomorrow, also come up and say hi to us, because we'll be there. Many of us that are on this call will be there tomorrow. Are there any other things that we wanted to raise up? We will soon also be having an action at Krasner's office in order to demand that Krasner charge these killer cops and also drop the charges against our righteous protesters who were standing up, and standing against oppression and violence in our communities, and standing up for that which we deserve, which all human beings deserve, the joy and a prosperity and happiness that is the foundation of what we're all seeking.
Absolutely. So Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this broadcast today, for this teach-in today. We do hope that this helps to greater inform everybody about who we are, what we are asking for, and why abolition is imperative if we are ever to realize the true liberty and justice and freedom that is our right as Black people. So thanks again, everybody, for coming to spend the evening with us. We hope that you join us again at our upcoming actions and that you stay informed and connected to us on all of our social medias and through our contact information that is scrolling below. And we are looking forward to engaging with you again. Peace and Black power.
Ain't no power like the power of the people.